A great camera is hard to find, and a great cinema camera is even harder to find. You can get away with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera that's pretty good for about $500 if you're lucky, and a good cinema camera with good bitrate, color depth, and dynamic range can run you up several thousands of dollars. And we've been looking for a camera that would be a really good B camera for our Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, but the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K has the same features. Let me catch my breath. That's a long title. The 4K and the 6K are pretty similar, so we're looking for something that has some different features that might be useful to us. So imagine my surprise when I saw this little boy. This is the ZCAM E2, which, don't you laugh at that, he's a good little boy. This is the ZCAM E2. This tiny little package gets you a lot, like 4K, 160 frames per second in 10-bit. That's whew, those are some specs that'll make Gemini Man blush. Is it as good as it boasts? Well, hit that like, smash that subscribe, and stay tuned to find out. So the ZCAM E2 is the newest offering from ZCAM, which is a company that you might not have heard of, but more recently are hearing more and more about because of their lines of this camera that are coming out recently. Traditionally, they've been doing VR cameras and 360-degree cameras, security cameras. And the reason you're hearing about them now is because they're trying to eat Blackmagic's lunch. And you can tell because this is actually lifted from an older Blackmagic camera you might not even know about, called the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera. That camera was really big when they were trying to push HD video when that was super new. And the reason why this is very similar is because at the time, it had this boxy frame, but also had this little boy. This is actually used, as well as a little Ethernet port, for broadcasting. So you can plug these two into your computer, and then you can control every part of this camera straight from your computer. That's really great, except we don't really have too much use for that now. And this camera is actually more similar to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, but the place where they differ is in their price. Where the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is about $1,295, this is an even $2,000. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is closer in price, but when we get down to it, this has some features that neither of them have. So let's go into that. So the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, I need to stop saying these names, jeez. The Blackmagic 4K, we'll just say that. Blackmagic 4K, 6K, I'm done with saying all these different syllables. Do you know, how many letters is that? Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, 6, 7? I lost track of my hand. So the Blackmagic 4K boasts 4K at 60 frames per second, which is really good for slow motion because you can slow down the footage about 40% and retain a lot of that good frame rate. But this one does 4K at 160 frames per second. That's another 100 frames. You know how much you can do with that? And it looks really, really nice and slow. And you're also getting a lot of other features with it. Really good audio that's coming in. You get an autofocus. You get a bunch of different video profiles. Look at all these. Look at all these different ways that you can record. And you can also simultaneously record proxy files. So when you have that big 4K crazy file, you can have a smaller file that's easier to edit with and then replace them right before you're about to render. You can record in Rec 709, which is the general color space where colors go to, but colors go to like they die. Jesus. You can record in the Rec 709 color space, but you can also do a flat picture profile, as well as Z-Log 2. And finally, you can record this bad boy with your phone and your computer, like we said, but the phone app really makes this thing far more usable. So you can plug your phone right into here and record it, as well as use wireless connectivity with your phone and record it from not too far away. Don't go too far. Don't go too far, it's not that good. And now that I mentioned how not great that connectivity is, a lot of the other features that we mentioned have a big old asterisk next to it, which we'll get into, but for right now, let's talk about the positives. So right off the bat, the audio quality of this camera internally is pretty good. It does have a little mini XLR input that you can plug in an actual large XLR input, like a shotgun mic that we're using right now that you can't see because Alan's good at his job. The scratch audio that comes from this is actually really not that bad if you clean it up a little bit in post.
So right now we're shooting on the ZCAM with a 422 ProRes resolution at 4K.
You can use it if you're in a pinch, like your primary audio recording isn't really working, or your audio guy forgot to hit record and stuff like that, which it happens. It happens to all of us. I'm looking at you audio guys, I feel you. I feel your plight. And speaking of things that are good internally, the Rec 709 picture profile is actually pretty good. A lot of people like to shoot in flat profiles or this Z-Log 2, the other different profiles that make it all nice and flat and gross and gray looking. Rec 709 right out of this, which is supposed to give you very realistic colors, looks really great. And luckily, if you record in Apple ProRes or something like that, you can still tweak the colors a decent amount, get a really good looking image out of it. That's a huge plus from us, not having to deal with too much in post. Unless you're going for a really stylistic look. I'm looking at you, Alan, with he's nodding very vigorously, and he's not saying anything because he knows that I'm going to give him even more.
I admit to my sins.
Exactly. Bless me, Father, for
Bless me, Father, for I've used neon lights yet again. Sorry.
What is your sin today, my child? I used the neon.
I used the hot pink.
I used the hot pink. And again, with the internals, it can do 4K at, I don't know if I mentioned this, it can do 4K at 160 frames per second. Isn't that cool? Everybody else online will tell you it's pretty cool. That's most of the headlines. If you look up this camera, it'll be like 4K 160. And it's worth the hype because the 4K 160 is so slow that it looks like people aren't moving if they're just going at a regular speed. It's really crazy. And you can also make sure that the project file is at 24 frames per second, so you don't have to be like, well, this is 160 frames, so now it's this many percentage. Nope, it just says, oh, you want 24 frames per second? Cool. Let's just stretch those 160 frames out, and then we'll make it easy for you in your timeline editing thing in post. And also, my favorite feature, really, it saved our bacon on a shoot, is the USB-C port. So if you can grab the Apple to USB-C cable, you can control this whole thing from your phone. This one gives you full control of the camera, as well as you can view playback and monitor the camera. So having a small monitor that you really always carry on with you is really useful. Another thing that made this super easy for us to get started is the fact that it takes Sony NPF batteries, which we have so many of, just so many from the time of using any light ever. NPF batteries, they're super useful. Luckily, this camera already takes NPF batteries, so it's easy to pop one in, turn it on, and get started. That makes this form factor even smaller than maybe the 4K or the 6K or any of those big cinema cameras. You don't need a V-mount battery to power it. So for us, that meant that even with the cage, we could put it on a gimbal we bought like 3 years ago. Like, it's super old. Like, it's the Zhiyun Crane Model 1. They don't even call it the Crane anymore. They call it like the Weeble Mess S11, 12, whatever now, Weeble something. It fit on a 3-year-old gimbal, which blew my mind. But that's really where all the good stuff ends, unfortunately, because this camera's got a lot to make up for, because this guy has only 10 buttons and no touchscreen. And one of those 10 buttons is the record button, and another of those 10 buttons is the power button. And then that really leaves you with 8 buttons that you can do much with. The top buttons, right here, where you navigate through the menus, aren't particularly that bad, but they're kind of mushy, so to register a click, you need to push harder than most cameras. It's not really a satisfying click either. Not only are they navigating up, down, and menu and OK, but if you hit function or you're outside of the menu, they also are your ISO and aperture and any of the other functions you want to map them to. So these buttons have the same functions as these 3 function buttons, but they also double as navigation, which can get a little confusing, and unfortunately, you see how dark they are? I doubt you can tell what they say from far away. And on top of that, if you have a cage on, you can't read the labels above it, so you can't really tell what they're doing unless you have it memorized, which can get really rough when you're on a dark shoot like we were last Friday. And luckily, I plugged in my phone so it was easier to control, but if you don't have your phone, it's really hard. Navigating through the menus isn't terrible. Legitimately, the menu system's pretty good, but the buttons can get mixed up in your mind, you don't know where you're going half the time, and the menus can be really important. And speaking of the menu's pretty easy to navigate, but you need to use it to get to your file formats, which is kind of hard to do because they're separated amongst 5 different subsections. Like, let me tell you. So you first go to record, then you have to pick between your resolution, frames per second, and your file format, all of which can be non-dependent on each other. And so if you change one, it might change the others. But wait, there's more. When you go back out to your menu, you also have the quote-unquote video setting. So under the video setting, you also have your variable frame rate and your encoder. So you have to basically do a trial by error of all of these different formats, because on Blackmagic, let's say you pick BRAW. Under BRAW, it grays out anything that you can't do. But this one just decides to choose for you, because hey, they know better than you do about your camera, right? Am I right? So if you pick 4K, but you want to do it at 160 frames per second, but then you're like, well, let me change it to this different type of 4K, because there are 3 different types of 4K on this thing. There are 3 different types. Well, technically 6. So there's DCI and UHD. So those are the 2 big types of 4K that are different, but they don't even call it DCI. They call it Cinema 4K, but it's not called Cinema 4K, it's called C4K. So there's C4K and 4K. And so those are the 2 ones. And then, and then under that, there's C4K and regular 4K. Then there's low-res C4K and regular 4K. And then there's 2x4x1, which is CinemaScope. So if you're not in C4K or regular 4K CinemaScope, which is 2x4x1, then you can't do slow frame rate. And if you're in Cinema 4K at 2x4x1, you can't do 160 FPS. You can do, I think, like 140 or 120 or something like that. So then you need to make sure you're in 4K 2.4.1, and then you can go.
What is all this?
Yeah, and then you can go to your variable frame rate, change that to 160 FPS, and then guess what? You can't do that in any other encoder besides H.265. So H.264 is a file format that most movies come in now and other things, but H.265 is an iteration on that gives you more color. But your computer is gonna have a hell of a time trying to use that, and Alan's nodding his head because they destroy our computers. It's like our computer's running a marathon and it's like hitting the wall. It's just like, oh man, I don't even know what to do. And you can't actually play back anything. It's always stuttery. The computer wanted to die. It was really sad. Like, we were basically looking at the computer like, should we put it out of its misery? So, on top of that, H.265 take a big old dump on your computer, and that's the only thing you can record 4K at 160 frames per second in. You gotta make peace with that if you're editing on a laptop, it's not really gonna work out too well. And unfortunately, another setting that's kind of rough is the ISO. So this is supposed to have dual native ISO, which is like a big buzz term that a lot of people like to use because it means that on lower ISO, which is kind of like fake light, like around 400, you get no noise. Then when you bump up to something higher like 3200, then you also have no noise. And that's really useful for if you go into a dark environment and then you have to bump up your ISO a lot. If you can get it up to 3200, you have very little noise. That's actually the settings that work on the Blackmagic. They have dual native ISO at 400, 3200. This boy has it at 500 and 2500, which would be great if I didn't think they were lying. Because when I went up to 2500, it's pretty noisy. And the more you go up, this thing boasts that it can do up to, I think it's 1,024,000 ISO. Like, it's crazy. But you shouldn't use it. You should be lighting your scene pretty well. That brings the usage of this camera up, that it's more for broadcast. So if you're trying to shoot something cinematic, you're not gonna allow for much noise unless you have DaVinci Resolve, which is the competitor's program, and that's pretty good denoising. So you basically need to buy the competitor's program to use this. Speaking of free apps, when you want to use RAW on this camera, which is like the big buzz term that if you can, I mean, we've been using B-RAW, like the Blackmagic RAW for a little while, and it is stellar, it's incredible. This guy uses Z-RAW, which sounds pretty cool and almost rhymes with B-RAW, isn't that crazy? But unfortunately, you need to have a separate app just to be able to take the Z-RAW format and then put it into H.264 or any of the other types of file formats that your editing software can even read. So that means that just to take the Z-RAW from this camera and use it on your computer, you need to have another program. And unfortunately, along with that, you need to dial in certain settings to make sure that your Z-RAW will look good when it's encoded. Let me just show you an example. So as you can see on the left, that's Z-RAW footage. As you can see on the right, that's H.264 Apple ProRes footage. They were both shot at the same time of day with the same settings, but on the Z-RAW footage, we didn't color correct it in their Z Camera app, whatever it is. So when you try to increase the exposure on both of these different file formats, they start to give a yellow tint to the Z-Raw and it looks bad, and this is just another step that not only do you have to like put it in another program, but you also need to make sure that all the settings are right just to be able to get here and realize that you did something wrong. While Apple ProRes works pretty well out of the gate. On top of that, the Z-Raw has a lot of extra noise. Remember when I told you this thing already gives you a bunch of noise? Would you like some more? Because here's some more.
Asshole.
And another you know what? Let's bring in another expert, a cinematography expert, Alan. Let's bring in Alan.
Hey, it's me, Alan. I'm really loud. So going to the positives, I guess. I really am a fan of like 160 frames a second, and the ISO can be an issue, but again, if you just light the place correctly, it shouldn't be a problem. But what if you don't have time to do that? Are you gonna tell the producer, hey, guess what, we're not gonna do it? No, you're gonna bump that ISO and hopefully have a tool system out there that can like denoise. Oh, that's right. That Blackmagic comes with that for free when you buy a Blackmagic. I do like the form factor. I love the fact that it's like super tiny and that we can take it anywhere as a run and gun camera. When I first saw it, I thought it was like a mini Arri Alexa Mini and the Arri Alexa Tiny, which is like super small and whatnot. This is not a beginner's camera because like a lot of beginner's cameras and whatnot, like the Canon 80D or a T5i or Sony, whatever, a lot of them have like autofocus, they will auto white balance and a lot of the times. Camera like this doesn't really do that. It's kind of like, you know, Dark Souls. They don't give you a tutorial, they don't hold your hand. But the fact is that I can't get to the functions that I want in a timely manner or an organized manner. It should be user-friendly out of all things. If your camera makes me feel like an idiot, I don't want it. Honestly, with the price point, I would just get an A7 III or an A7S II or even a Blackmagic 6K. There's better things to focus on than high-speed cameras. Phantom has that covered. Just rent a Phantom.
Over $5,000.
Yeah, just do that.
Okay. On IndieBin.
Yeah, on IndieBin. I have to emphasize, I just have to make this clear. Getting a better camera will not make you a better person. It will not make you a better cinematographer. It will not make you better anything. As one sports guy once said, a $100 bat will not fix a $5 swing. I heard that yesterday and I'm using it now. But that's just my 2 cents. This is Alan's 2 cents. I give them so that you don't have to.
Thanks, Alan. That was really negative. I don't know. In addition with it not...
Also, did I forget? If you want to hook it up to a wall, look at this tentacle mess. You would think you're shooting hentai instead of an actual movie with all this.
So it comes with this charger. So it comes with this charger that plugs into the wall, but then, okay. It plugs into the wall, but then the wall plugs into a D-tap. The D-tap plugs into a DC power in, and the DC power in plugs into here. And that's the thing that's crazy about this, is just like the buttons, the charger has like 8 functions. You can't make this kind of stuff up. That honestly brings us to the final point, which is something that we've been mentioning all this way, which is this camera isn't super well supported. Not only when we got it, we had to update the firmware just to get 160 frames per second to work, but the different people that are supporting it aren't supporting it completely. The different buttons that I said you had to press, guess how you do playback on this? Give me a guess. Write it down in the comments right now. I'll wait.
Is there a button for it?
No, there's all the function buttons that I had mentioned. There's no playback button. What do you think it would be? Like, it's like nothing, right? You have no idea because it's a short tap on the power button.
Wow, scary.
It's, like, to turn off, to view back what you're doing, you have to short tap on the power button, which is a little workaround that they had to do because they wanted to fit so much into this thing. They thought of if they could, they didn't think of if they should, like Jurassic Park. Jeff Goldblum, I love you. So not only is the Z-Raw app not great, and some of these buttons are kind of weird, and all the other stuff I talked about, but we never got a couple features that are kind of integral to a camera to work. So on a cinema camera, you shouldn't really have autofocus, but even when testing this, the autofocus never worked. I would keep it on like focus, I would just shift it to focus, then hit autofocus really quick to see what it would do. It would be like, oh, let me defocus that for you really quick. Let me get you there. Let me get you out of focus real quick. Not only did that not work, but a big function that I wanted was wireless transmission. There's a little place where you can plug in a wireless transmitter, and then you can control this entire camera from your phone by using Wi-Fi. And that's something that I really love in a lot of cameras, and we even did the review on the Axoon CineEye, which gives you a wireless view of what the camera sees. So wireless transmission didn't work, might as well get the cord that plugs into the camera. So I had to go out, buy that cord. Plugged in the cord, plugged in my phone. Wait a second, well now SSDs don't work because you can't plug anything else into the USB-C. So we already have a couple SSDs that we use for the Blackmagic, but we can't use that on the ZCAM. So what are we going to do? Oh, well, it has a CFast port. So let's just go get a CFast card, which we already need one for the Blackmagic NE, so let's buy one really quick. Bought a 250 gig CFast card, which costs as much as like a terabyte or 2 terabyte SSDs. We'll leave that for another video. But we have the CFast card now, cool. Let's just put it in there. This is impossible to open. This CFast port, and Alan's laughing because we legitimately like the Three Stooges were just like, I don't know what to do. Like, just try to open it. And I got decently strong thumbnails. I can't. This isn't even a joke. I can't. I want to do it. I can't. And the only way to open the port is to use a separate little tool, which I had just luckily gotten a flathead, so you can kind of pry it open with a flathead. But now you're potentially hurting your camera because you're trying to get to a CFast, because it's a workaround for 8 other things. That ultimately puts this thing in perspective. I really respect Tilta. I love their cages as well as like the nucleus and all the stuff that they create. When we found out there was a Tilta cage for the ZCAM, we got pretty excited. So much so that we purchased one, and it doesn't actually screw in everywhere. This thing is so poorly supported that Tilta, which make amazing stuff, couldn't align some of the holes on this. So if you screw in one side, like the bottom and the sides, the top holes don't align.
Correction, the top hole won't align, but if you want, you can fit in all the screws.
Oh, okay.
All the screws will fit in, but if you do that, it will cover buttons.
Oh, yeah!
Yeah, it will cover like a portion of the button and you can't read what it says anymore.
Yeah, if you align the top screw, like right now, it's pretty flush against the buttons, so if you scooch this back, it'll cover the buttons, and you can't get to the buttons that are already hard to press. And on top of that kind of support we wanted to give it, because we like to build it out, we also got the Portkeys BM5 monitor, which is the monitor everybody's recommending we get with this bad boy. So, grab the Portkeys, put it on an arm so we can put it on here. We actually really like the monitor, but the main reason we got it is for, I'm holding way too many things, is for this little guy. This little contraption plugs right into the camera and should give you complete control of the camera. But guess what? Didn't come with a firmware update. And then we tried to firmware update it, but I updated the wrong firmware, so now it's like updated for version 2.0, but we can't control the camera. I went to go look for the actual, I finally tracked down what firmware I needed, and then their site crashed. And so it's been down since I tried to do that. So I can't get the firmware on this to control this, because this is already poorly supported. I want you to know how much of a headache, I can't hold all of this. I want you to know how much of a headache this has been for Alan and I, just to try to get base functionality out of this. And that ultimately comes from the fact that I feel like we're all kind of spoiled now. This is the Linux of cameras. It's really hard to get into, but according to a lot of people online, it's really great once you learn how to use it. I'm really used to like picking up a camera, being able to know what to do with it, and shooting right away. Unless you have a few weeks to a month to pick this up and put it through its paces, it's gonna give you a big headache on any sort of shoot. And when you're testing it, prepare for a lot of problems. If you think of any other camera you might pick up from like a big brand like Canon or Sony or Blackmagic, this thing is gonna be a lot tougher to use. And from what I've seen online, a lot of people really don't mind those issues. It's not a huge deal. They've found different workarounds, and I recommend that if you're willing to put in the time to this, then you might really enjoy it. And you might think that it's the perfect camera for you, because 4K 160 frames per second is pretty hard to beat. I can't think of any other camera on the market that does that for this price point. Like I said, though it is $700 more than the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema, oh my god, the Blackmagic 4K, and it is $500 less than the Blackmagic 6K, it does stuff that neither of them could even hope to do right now. But what do you think? Are you willing to put up with all this crazy stuff that we warned you about? Or are you willing to wait for a 4K 160 frames per second camera a little bit further down the line? If you do have some experience with the ZCAM and you think that, hey, you guys were just doing this wrong or this wrong, please let us know in the comments. We would really love the advice. We would appreciate it, because it's been a little bit of a headache and we're kind of, I wouldn't say sick of this camera. There's some stuff we really love and the footage looks when you know what you're doing, but ultimately we could use a little bit of help. So in the comments, please give any advice that you have. And if you like this video, give it a like. If you disliked it, give it, oh my God, give it a dislike. If you have any opinion, please leave it in the comments below. We read all of them and we really appreciate everybody that's been giving us a little bit of love in the comments. And from us, we're gonna go throw this like a baseball and see what kind of window we can break.
Jesus Christ. And now we're gonna vandalize our neighborhood with a $2,000 camera.
Exactly, but not with the speed booster on. I'm keeping that.
Yeah,
That's
we have
mine.
to keep the speed.
You gotta keep the key speed.